Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar from AMPO and from our Socioeconomic Forecasting Interest Group. We've still got some folks trickling in from the waiting room. I'm going to keep hitting admit all till they're all with us. But as I said, thank you for joining us. My name is Ellen Zaviska. I serve on the AMPO staff as our Transportation Planning Manager. And so one of my big roles is coordinating with our interest groups. We have 7 of them, and they help us to bring you these webinars throughout the year. So as I said, this webinar is brought to us from our Socioeconomic Forecasting Group. Carlos is one of the members of that. He's going to be moderating today. And I'm going to kick off with just one housekeeping slide. Ask everyone to please keep muted while our presenters are speaking, but you are welcome to drop your questions or comments into the chat at any time. And then, of course, when it's time for Q&A, you can raise your hand, you can unmute and ask a question, or wait for the moderator to call on you to ask your question, whatever you feel comfortable with. We record the meeting. We use the transcript to create notes that will be shared afterward, and we'll also share the slides on our membership portal. And ask if you don't mind putting your organization into your Zoom handle so we know where you're joining us from. And I'll also just acknowledge, obviously, there's a lot going on in the MPO world, a lot of uncertainty. We've had, as AMPO, a couple of listening sessions recently, and we've got one more scheduled in a few weeks, just to give folks an opportunity to, share what you're hearing, share what you're concerned about. And I will add the registration link for that listening session into the chat in case you're interested in joining us for that. And with that, I will go on and introduce today's moderator. Carlos is with CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Area Agency for Planning. There he focuses on data engineering, model diagnostics, scenario. Carlos has a degree from University of Illinois at Chicago in urban planning and policy and business analytics. He's done lots of cool things that you can see there in his bio. And with that, I will ask Carlos to introduce our topic and our speakers.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Yes. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carlos Lopez, joining you from Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning at CMAP. The goal of today's webinar is to understand how our fellow MPOs are modeling household location choice decisions in their socioeconomic forecast. So we'll be hearing a little bit from AZMag and SEMCOG about their experiences. And from the discussion today, we're going to hear from hopefully hear from others about what segmentation and household variables work and don't work for their modeling. By don't work, I mean maybe you were modeling households by household of size 1 and households with size 2 or more persons. And because the model was treating households of size 2 the same as households of size 6, the model was placing a bunch of larger households in areas with typically smaller household sizes. So maybe that's something that doesn't work. What was your solution? Or maybe all your explanatory variables for evaluating parcels or blocks in your model had to do with characteristics that were only relevant to urban areas and therefore produce a bias towards a large city in your region. How did you change your variables or segmentation to make your results sort of work and make more sense? Yeah, so we're interested in hearing about your challenges and solutions for how you model household location choice decisions. And yep, so we can go to the next slide. So I'll go ahead and introduce today's speakers. The first is Scott Bridwell. Scott has been a socioeconomic modeler at the Maricopa Association of Governments in Phoenix for more than 15 years. He works on population estimates and socioeconomic projections, as well as miscellaneous GIS analysis and programming tasks. Scott has a Master of Science in Geography from the University of Utah. Next slide. The next speakers will be Guangyu Li and Tin Shi from SEMCOG. For Guangyu as the lead forecast modeler at SEMCOG, Guangyu has been working on regional development forecasting modeling for more than 17 years. He received his PhD in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. Since joining SEMCOG, Guangyu has focused on implementing an urban sim model in the Detroit region, providing innovative solutions for various modeling challenges. Currently, he leads efforts to enhance forecast model performance and adopt new modeling techniques. Tina is a land use modeler at SEMCOG, joining the organization in 2019. Since he started at SEMCOG, has been focused on developing and improving urban sim demographic and economic forecasting models for Southeast Michigan. His work centers on enhancing model accuracy, integrating new data sources, and advancing innovative modeling techniques. Tina holds a Master of Urban Planning from the University of Michigan. And so our first speaker will be Scott from AZMag. So Scott, whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen.
Can everybody see my screen and hear me? Okay, so good morning.
We can hear you, but I cannot see your screen.
Okay,
Is that just a me problem?
can you see it now?
No, I can.
Okay, let me try one more time. Can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks, Carlos. I'm Scott Bridwell. I'm from the Maricopa Association of Governments. We are in Phoenix, Arizona is our metro area, and we comprise Maricopa County, parts of Pinal County, and also parts of Yavapai County. And so in talking to you today, I'm going to basically discuss some sort of define the problem and some general considerations to think about with household location choice models. I'm assuming right now that not everybody speaks Urban Sim. And so I'm going to treat this as more of a general sort of problem, think about some of the general things that we think about it when we develop. Then I'll talk a little bit more about our specific implementation that we used in our last forecast, which was in 2022, specifically with the household location choice model. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we encountered, some of the things that we did to kind of address them, as well as some of the future work that we're looking at doing going forward. Okay. Everybody can still see my question, still see my screen? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, so the household location choice problem. Thinking about this is kind of a hokey example. I got a little carried away with the clip art, but we can think about the household location choice problem as first we have essentially a set of individual level households. Now these households could be people that are maybe new migrants into our region that we've run through a urban sim transition model. So we have individual level records. These might be people that have decided to relocate from existing dwelling units into new units that we need to basically find a home for. These might also be, from an explanatory perspective, these might be observations of individuals that we're then trying to sort of capture the characteristics of their residential decision-making process. On the flip side, we have a set of residential units. These could be vacant residential units that are existing already. These could be new residential units that were developed within the sequence of the model system based on some sort of real estate development process. And essentially the problem that we're talking about today, the core problem, is how do we take these individual level households and then essentially assign them to individual residential units that we can use for our modeling purposes. So in the terms of the segmentation aspect of this, the question becomes, how do we group households together in meaningful ways that allows us to support the modeling process? So in this situation here, we might think about modeling households by size. And in that situation, then we now have individual submodels or individual equations for each household size grouping. We might think about how to do this by age of head. Again, this would change the model structure and how we're kind of deciding on which explanatory variables we want to use. We might think about doing this by income. So each of these are different decisions that we would make, and these are going to basically impact everything downstream in terms of the modeling process. So in terms of kind of what we think about and kind of the aspects of the design in developing a location choice model, obviously one of the key components is the explanatory variables and the model form. So what are the independent variables that we're looking at and also like what is the actual like equation structure. So typically, in most cases, we are using a multinomial logit kind of choice structure. The next sort of level that we think about again are these segmentation strategies. So how do we group agents together in some meaningful way in combination with those equations that we're developing to sort of support the process? We also have different ways that sort of these choices can be implemented in the simulation itself. And the ways that we sort of decide to assign those choices is going to impact the types of variables that we can use, and it's also going to impact maybe our decisions within the segmentation itself. And finally, more on the alternative side, or if we're thinking about the residential units themselves, the way that we choose to select or sample those residential units for the process is going to impact these as well. So all these things kind of interact with each other to sort of inform how we're going to do this. So in terms of segmentation itself, we tend to think, or at least I tend to think about this really in terms of sort of two dimensions. And you can think about it sort of on one side being sort of the alternative side or the residential unit side, and the other side being sort of the agent side or the household side. And so on the sampling side, what we're really considering is how do we group alternatives together? And essentially what this is really defining is which of alternatives are going to be available to which agents. And a lot of the times that we do this, we basically do this by some jurisdiction level or some sort of a county level. And so we do this so that we can basically align with our control totals that we're bringing in from our transition model or other types of results. Then on the agent side, this is where we're actually going to try and group agents together that have basically similar characteristics or similar sort of choice behaviors. And really what we're going to do is we're going to estimate different equations for each of these groups. And then we may also do some further refinement with the sampling process itself within this. Now, in terms of, I mentioned the choice framework, and this might be getting a little bit into the weeds, but this is important, I think, when thinking about both the types of segments that we define and also the types of explanatory variables that we decide. So we can think about this, or at least the way I think about it is generally we have a sort of an aggregate or a segment level choice structure, or we have an individual level choice structure. So if we have an aggregate level choice structure, basically we're doing the choice at the segment level itself. So for instance, if we had 3 groupings of households, maybe low income, median income, high income, we're essentially making 3 choices within the process. And so each of these has an equation. It's going to get applied to the available residential units that are available to it. And then based on that, we're going to basically make one choice, choose a set of units based on the number of households that we have. And then those choices, they're going to be randomly assigned to those households. So essentially what this means is that once the households are within the segment, the individual characteristics aren't necessarily as important because we're just making that choice once. And so in terms of like the urban sim open implementation, this is kind of like the default structure that you would get. And then the opposite, or the other way to think about this is more of an individual level assignment. And so for this case, we're actually, each individual is making their own individual choice. And so for each segment, every household is going to sample some reasonable number of alternatives. And then based on that, they're going to compute their own probabilities for each one of those individuals. And we're going to basically run through this process until we've located everybody. And so again, the types of segments we define might differ based on whether we're using an aggregate level assignment or an individual level assignment. So in terms of how we might come up with these segmentation strategies, we can think about this really as sort of the benefits of a detailed segmentation strategy, when we might want to use one, or when we might want to use a less detailed segmentation strategy. And so really the benefits of a more detailed segmentation strategy is that we are really creating more specific groups of segments, and then they're more homogeneous. The characteristics of the agents themselves are more similar within these as well. And so I think this is really important if you are doing a more aggregate level model, because there's less individual level considerations that are happening within it. So some of the cons, or where we might want like a less detailed segmentation structure, would be there could be some potential overfitting if these segments are too specific. it's potentially time consuming. It's very laborious to estimate these equations and go through the estimation process. So the more segments that you have, the more of these that you're gonna have to go through and do. Also, as things become more on the segment side, there's less potential explanatory variables that we can sort of bring into our actual model equation structure itself. And the last being that if you have a more of an individual based model where we have individual interaction variables, for instance, interacting the income of the household with the value of the home, then we can maybe account for having less segments because we're actually accounting for agent level interactions there. So in terms of how MAG has their household how we have our household location choice model implemented, in terms of the alternatives, we are doing basically building level choices that are organized by parcel, and we have these segmented by each of our counties. So we run our control totals at the county level, and at that point, basically every agent's assigned to a county, and so there are county-specific choices made within that. In terms of the choice framework, we're using an individual-based choice framework. So every household is sampling their own alternatives and making their own choices. Right now, we are sampling about 50 alternatives for each model run for each household, and we are weighting those based on the age of the building. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we do that a little bit later. And in terms of our segmentation structure, it's really pretty straightforward. We're segmenting just on income. Right now, we have 3 income groups. Households less than or equal to 30,000, 30,000 to 100,000, and 100,000 plus. And this is based on 2021 dollars. This because Census 2020 was our base, and we used ACS 2021. When we do the next forecast and when we revisit development, we'll probably update these ranges and maybe look at some potential different combinations as well. So why do we choose the segments that we did? The first thing is pretty obvious. We expect to see differences in the residential choices among households with different incomes. And also, we've done estimations both with the segmentation and basically without any segmentation, and we found better results. In terms of the distributions, we found that these generally follow sort of income tritiles. So we have similar groups within those. And what we're really trying to do here is we wanted to have some degree of segmentation so that we can basically try and have different types of behaviors among these agents, but then we also wanted to be able to use household specific variables as well. So then we didn't want to kind of overburden the segmentation process with that. So in terms of the explanatory variables that we looked at a lot of different stuff. We generally think about these in sort of 4 bins. So first off, we have what are sort of the building or the site specific variables. So these are the things that are specific to the residential unit itself. So its price, its size, its age, that type of thing. Then we have sort of proximity variables. So these are just simple, what is the distance to the nearest CBD, light rail stop, freeway, that kind of thing. Then we have sort of more nuanced proximity variables, which we define as accessibility or neighborhood variables. And so we use the task schemes that come out of the travel model to then determine things like how much retail employment is within 20 minutes of a given building, what is the population within 15 minutes. We also look at things like predefined zones like TASs, like what is the TAS level, median income. We might also look at things like, what are the neighbors in the immediate vicinity type of thing. And then the last set of variables are really kind of agent variables or interaction variables. And this is where we're actually trying to bring in a household level characteristic and take it against the actual building level characteristic. So in terms of the estimation process, the way that we do this is we take, for each one of our segment, we sample a predefined number of households that we're going to use for estimation. And the source data for this is our base year data. So we go through and we generate a base year data set using the ACS and the PUMs and our built space data. And at that point, we have synthesized households and also parcel level residential units. So we sample those households for each of those groups. And when we do this, we try to restrict this to just those that are classified as recent movers within the PUMs. So basically people that have moved within the last 5 years, with the rationale being that, somebody that's lived in a given location for 20 years is maybe somebody that we want to try to use within our estimation process. So then for each of these units or each of these individuals that we've sampled, we then sample 50 basically residential units for that from the data, and we also then have their actually observed residential unit. We then compute a ton of explanatory variables. So we generate this massive sort of flat table that computes all the different things that we're thinking about. It's also looking at lots of different distance relationships and also accessibility relationships as well. And then we have an automated process that's going to iteratively basically look at different combinations of those variables and also different types of proximities and accessibility times, and then basically keep the ones where essentially we're improving the goodness of fit and also where the variables and the signs of them actually make sense. And then at that point, we're then going through and doing some additional mapping and analysis on that as well. So in terms of the results that we have for our variables for the different segments, in the first segment, this is the lower income households, less than 30,000. We have essentially 3 building level variables that we're looking at. So basically, what is the dwelling unit type, the average value per unit, the age, and then we have a distance to light rail, and then we have some neighborhood characteristics. So what is the neighborhood household income? What is the neighborhood residential vacancy rate? And then we have a couple of interaction variables as well. So interacting the household size versus the dwelling unit size, essentially. And then looking at the tenure of the household versus the dwelling unit type as well. And then so for our second segment, we have a couple more variables within this one. Again, we have some site-specific variables, so dwelling unit age, basically residential square feet per unit. We have some additional neighborhood variables. So this time we're actually bringing in some retail job densities. We're looking at some sort of neighborhood age patterns as well as educational attainment patterns. And again, we're interacting the income versus the housing value and also the tenure versus the building type. And we have a similar structure for households that are greater than 100,000. Again, we have similar structural variables, but these, again, will have different coefficients and results within them. Then we have a series of neighborhood variables that are pretty similar to the middle income group. And this time we're just interacting the tenure versus the dwelling unit type. Okay, so some of the challenges that we've come across with this. Obviously, this is one I think that everybody experiences. Basically, data quality, perhaps using our synthesized data has limitations to it because we're essentially looking at where people are at. We're not looking at their actual decision-making process itself. So it would be nice at some point to actually have more of a sample that actually talk to people about their decisions when choosing a specific residential unit. The other thing that's really important here that I touched on is that when you're doing the individual level choices, the sampling per agent, the choices in the sampling scheme are incredibly important. And so one of the things that we found was that we had what we call kind of the sort of a cold front of vacancy. And so what would happen is because when we're building units, the number of new units that we're developing is sort of much less than the overall available units in terms of the housing stock. What we found was that unless we weighted the building age so that we were actually trying to select more new units, we would be leaving a lot of the new units vacant because just in terms of overall frequencies, it was more likely that they would choose an existing unit already. So that's one thing that we found. And so by using a specific type of building age sampling weight, that seemed to alleviate some of those problems. And this is kind of related to that syncing the real estate development, because real estate development is a completely separate model and independent really from what's happening on the location choice side. Sometimes there can be some mismatches. And again, this is something where the sampling weight seemed to help with that problem. Another issue is just, obviously our segments are pretty straightforward. They're very, very general in terms of those income groupings. And so there is still some variability within those segments that we might want to kind of address going forward. And then the last thing is really more for actually doing like scenario development analysis. The estimations that we're doing are based on the observed data that we have. And so it's not necessarily straightforward to modify coefficients when we're trying to think about how agents might be or how households might be making decisions differently in the future than they are today. So that's one versus, something like a rate table, you can just change the rates and apply it, and that's fine going forward. But trying to modify these individual coefficients tends to be kind of problematic for us so far. And in terms of sort of where we're going from here, one thing I think that we're interested in doing is to potentially look at some different segmentation strategies. And one thing I think that could potentially be interesting is to actually look sort of more multidimensionally. So do something like factor analysis or maybe k-means to actually look at some different types of totally different segmentation strategies that hopefully would allow us to keep kind of the number of segments small, like less than 5, but at the same time maybe capture more sort of within segment variation. Some of the other work that we're doing is a lot of sensitivity testing, so basically tweaking variables and seeing like how that kind of changes the results. We're also interested in looking at some different sampling schemes, again, that can maybe help out our results a little bit. And then we're also interested in maybe doing more of a nested choice framework. So rather than just choosing units straight up, maybe the agents are actually choosing sort of more grouped sort of segmented housing units and then making decisions in a hierarchical way after they go through that. And that's all I have. Here's some contact information for myself as well as my colleagues at MAG. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Scott. Let's go ahead and check the chat for questions here. Looks like Thor Morris has a question. Is the value per unit variable equivalent to rent? Anecdotal conversations suggest rent seems to be one of the dominating factors.
Yes, so it is essentially equivalent to that. We have the data that we're using on the residential unit side is coming from our assessor parcels, and or I guess improvements on those assessor parcels. And so we're equating the value per unit of the like apartments or whatever to be equivalent to what the rent would be.
Great, thanks. Any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or go ahead and unmute and just ask Scott. Oh, we have one. Okay. Comment from Todd Graham. Related to Thor's point, the consultants at urbansim.com really lean on ACS PUMS microdata in which every household is either a renter or a unit owner. And UrbanSim Inc. has to segment the household types by owner renter. I'm not persuaded that's necessary. Other socioeconomic variables matter more. What do you think?
Yeah, so that's one approach to it. Again, there's all sorts of different, I guess, decisions that can be made. We are using the tenure on the variable itself. So the way that we've approached that is to not segment on the tenure, but to use tenure as a interaction variable with the dwelling unit type. So for instance, you would interact. So like if you have a given agent that's a renter, we have that characteristic and they might have sampled a set of housing units and their choice would be influenced by whether they are looking at like an apartment unit or if they're looking at a single family unit. Does that answer your question? Okay, great.
Okay, what was one of the reasons you had fewer variables in segment 1 than segment 2? Yep, or then segment 2 and 3. Yep.
Yeah, I guess that's just kind of how it kind of got fleshed out within the estimation process. And so,
I see, yeah.
So there are some similarities in terms of which variables are sort of shared by segment, but it's not totally consistent. So I think really what's happening is we're keeping the variables through that sort of iterative process that are significant basically. And so it just must be that some of those variables weren't significant for that, or the signs were weird or something.
Yeah. Okay, great. Another question, you mentioned the cold front of vacancy.
Right.
These new units that you're referring to, are these new units from the developer model or new units that you supply to the forecast through like a development pipeline? Where are the new units coming from that you're referring to?
Yeah, so we have a generic developer model, and the developer model every year has some sort of regional demand that it's computing, and we do that by unit type. So we basically have like a regional demand every year for single family versus multifamily, and that's defined kind of a priori versus using basically the household level control totals, and then also looking at kind of recent trends and expectations. So those are defined up front, and then we have some of our projects that are building new units are based on things in the pipeline, especially within the first 5 years or so. The majority of those are probably using things that we have known active developments for. And then as we push out, we tend to run ours over a 30 or 35-year horizon. And so as we push out beyond, 10 to 15 years, some of those are more speculative, I would say. Those are still based on things like general plans and no developments, but we have less information on those for sure.
Okay, great, thanks. And yeah, you would come up with a way to essentially weight the age so that the newer units were receiving households rather than just older units or existing units, right?
Right, exactly.
Great. Yeah, that seems like a really unique way to sort of solve that vacancy issue. It's something that we've had as well. So yep, might talk to you about that more. But
Okay, great.
okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So what I'll do is go to our first poll question. This poll question is about the explanatory variables used to evaluate units, maybe either units in parcels or census blocks within your forecast model. So which of these variables are accounted for in your agency's housing choice location model? Feel free to click on as many as you want, I believe. So let's see. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of access to transportation, employment opportunities and wages, housing costs, some for schools, some for environmental conditions, access to healthcare. Let's see. Okay. It seems like, okay, yeah, no, results are still coming in. All right, looks like they've stabilized. So I'll go ahead and hopefully share these results with you. So if you can see this, which of these variables are accounted for in your agency's household location choice model? Access to transportation, 100%. Access to healthcare, a few. I know in CMAP's model, we use access to the healthcare, especially NAICS sector. Environmental conditions, some, and 4 for schools. Okay. For those who listed schools, can anyone list or maybe tell us about like a way that you go about doing that? I know that when we ask municipalities, like, how is it that, you define your evaluation of a house or an apartment? Usually the first thing they mention is schools or education quality, and then we immediately say, oh, okay, that's not something we measure, but are there any other variables? So if you could tell us a little bit more about how you incorporate school quality, that would be great. And yeah, feel free to put in the chat or speak up anytime. But what I've noticed is here, what we mostly have are lots of pull variables. So variables that would pull households towards the area. And we seem to have a lack of push variables that would push households away, such as tax, insurance costs. Although we do have some price of goods and services and yeah, and other. Great. Right. I have one more quick poll question before we go to the next speaker here. So which variables aren't in your model, but you'd like to add them? Okay, I'm seeing schools and environmental conditions come in. Seeing some more of the push variables such as tax burden, insurance costs, price of goods and services. Let's see. Okay. So I'll go ahead and share these results. Yeah, so it's basically the inverse. It was basically the inverse of what we had seen from our results for poll question 1, that a lot of folks are seemingly interested in environmental conditions in schools. Yeah, as I mentioned, whoever's using schools in their socioeconomic forecast, please feel free to leave something in the chat or let us know how you go about doing that. I know it's been a real challenge for us. Great. Tax burden as well. Yeah, some of these push variables, which are inherently, it seems like for a lot of these, you would have to create a model for school quality maybe, or a model for taxes. These things can change over time, or just let them remain stagnant over time in the model. That would be just a decision. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We only have so much time, so I will go ahead now and let's go to the second speaker. We have Guangyu and Teen from SEMCOG. So whenever you're ready, please go ahead and share your screen.
Anybody see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So, good afternoon, everybody from Michigan, and really glad to see so many people here. And we all have the very similar topic, also the segmentations in location choice model. And I'm glad to see, Scott had pretty detailed explanation on how the location choice model works in urban scene. So that will save us quite some time. We are just focus on our kind of a empirical kind of experience, when we develop the SEMCOG model. And on the other side, we know the so-called observations and the reflections from our own experience are probably still pretty limited. And some issue where I'm going to talk about may or may not apply to your region. But anyway, I hope this talk can help to promote this topic and to lead toward a more productive conversation. Maybe I should start the slide mode. Okay. So very brief introduction of our SEMCOG implementation of the urban scene system. We have been using urban scene system in the last 20, 25 years. Starting early the 2000, we started doing some pilot testing about the urban scene system. And over time, we already produced 4 official forecasts using the urban scene. And our system essentially changed quite a lot along with urban scene development. From the grid cell system to the parcel-based system, the software platform moved from the urban scene 1 to urban scene 2. And every time we try to adopt all the so-called latest features or functions from the urban scene, and also we try to add our own kind of customizations and additional features or submodels. So that's how we do our forecast here. And here I'm going to show 2 maps. And this is about the population and to give people some idea about the regional context. The population changes between 2010 to 2020. On the left side, you see this is a map. We call it large area maps. So SAMCOG has 7 counties, but the core of the region, the Detroit, has very kind of a distinct, unique, development trend. It's kind of declining for decades. And so it has its own kind of development history, socioeconomic dynamics. So we kind of separate out as a separate area. So in our model system, we configure the region as 8 large area. And our region is not a fast-growing region. And the growth between the 2010 to 2020, I mean, in general, and in the total, it's about 2.7%. I think that's a number. And the surrounding city, kind of a surrounding county around the Detroit, is kind of growing, but not in a very fast pace. On the right side, we're looking at this is the so-called MCD maps. And the MCD maps is looking at the so-called absolute population changes. Again, the biggest decline is really in the city of Detroit. But you look at the whole region, there's definitely a mixed type of development. Some places, some MCDs develop, kind of keep growing in this time period. But there are other cities, MCDs, has more stable, a little bit up and down, and there's some cities actually suffered, population loss quite significantly. And this kind of situation, kind of mixed situation, it varies from so-called large area by large area. So that's what, and also this kind of post some kind of a challenging to our modeling practice, because we know land use model in general, it works better when coming to predicting growth, but not so much in the declining scenarios. And so that's where we talk a little bit, introduce a little bit about the key characteristics of the SAMCOG household location choice model. And our region is actually, when we develop the models, we realized that the various situations, from large areas by large areas. So we actually configure the model by large area. So essentially, for every single large area, we already have a separate household location choice model. So you can think that as already a segmentation. And we also have the so-called income segmentations, similar to the MAC model, but we don't use the specific, the income groups. We use the income quartiles. Sometimes we use the 3 segmentation, essentially combines the middle 2 quartile together. And of course, by default, the estimation and simulation are quite consistent. The same kind of a model structure we used in that estimation will carry it to the simulation part. And the estimation tool we used is that's the default urban city discrete choice modeling estimation, and just very convenient to go through the estimation and then simulate the integrated into the simulation part. And the simulation process, as Scott already explained, is just some kind of a household selection process, and we also use the sampled vacant housing units. Talking about the so-called segmentations, something we just have to emphasize here, just there are some pros and cons. Thinking about the potential benefits of the segmentation. First, you do have improved performance, as already is planned. You have more homogeneous kind of households within each segment, then that will definitely improve the model fit and also improve the predictive accuracy. But at the same time, it really help you to have a kind of a deeper insight in terms of the location choice behavior, and also give you better understanding on the outcomes as well. So those seem to be trivial, but actually those are important when coming to the model review and kind of a validation stage, because you understand the model, you know whether the estimation produced a result, the coefficient are actually correct or not, makes sense or not. And another important reason to use segmentation, actually from the technical perspective. Back in 15 years ago, they have very limited computer resource and very limited, memory size. So running model by segmentation actually can help to reduce the memory usage and improve the running time. Although on the other side, you have some potential concerns. First, sample size, data quality within each segmentations. And we definitely have some kind of issues when we have very detailed segmentation. We do have the running into the issues, the sample size issue. And also thinking about the segmentations, when you have many segmentation, it's kind of expensive to run through the estimation. For our region, for example, thinking about already have eight large area, then combined with the 4 income groups, income segmentation, you have 32 models, right? So running through the estimation process, develop the best specification for every single model, are definitely very time-consuming process. So that's something you want to consider. What's the best strategy? Where's the trade-off point that you want to make when thinking about the segmentation? Of course, another thing you want to think about is just households really evolve. We don't have some kind of same characteristic even within the same income groups. Things could change over time. So that you have to keep in mind. Another thing we kind of observed, but it may not apply to other regions, is just that we do see this kind of something called order dependency issue. So essentially, the outcomes of the simulation could be biased simply because due to the order of the housing selection process. Because we run the simulation by segmentation, then this issue could come up. Segmentation is definitely a way to improve the HLCM, calibration, and so something. This is one of the slides I kind of borrowed from the earlier project that we finished with the urban thinking. So we actually, after the forecast, usually we have some discussions, review with the urban thinking, and try to see where we can address the major concern. And this project we actually had after the 2045 forecast. At that time, we definitely have some concern of the HLCM performance. And so urban thinking kind of step in to help us to do some calibration to see how far they can push the model calibration. And here you can see that instead of just the income quartiles, and urban thinking added the so-called household size, essentially persons and age of heads as additional kind of segmentation. And of course, beyond that, there's also updates on the estimation variables. And so the calibration result actually pretty impressive. This is what I selected, so this has probably one of the best result. But you can see that compared to so-called observed here just means that compared to our official kind of forecast result, and then versus the so-called simulated subside, you can see on the calibrated model, the post-calibration model is actually much more consistent. On the left side, this so-called stock model, it doesn't have so much consistency. So definitely segmentation, when configured correctly, properly, then definitely an improvement to the model performance. But at the same time, when we use segmentation, especially income segmentation, we do observe some kind of negative issues. The order dependency is something we actually had to spend some time to tackle with. Again, this is just running the household location choice model by segment through some certain orders, and you do have this kind of effects. So observation is just when you run low income segment to high income segment, you will see that in certain households, high income neighborhood, the high income households will gradually be replaced by income households. So this kind of shifting is definitely a big concern. And the reason is very simple, because you're giving the prioritize to low income people, so allow them to pick from the housing unit first. And so this is kind of distorts the market dynamics, and it produces some kind of biased location patterns. So that's something we definitely don't want to see. And very simple note here is just quick note here is just if you run the model in the reverse order from the high income to low income group, at some point you will see some kind of reverse effects as well. So it may not appear to all the high income neighborhood, low income neighborhood, but that definitely more or less will be there. So how can we provide some kind of remedies or some solution to this issue? So turned out to be quite some different solutions, more or less to tackle this problem. First, a very simple, straightforward thought is just if you are dealing with income quartiles, income level, different income groups, then how about you also group the property values, then at least provide some kind of a value ranges to allow only certain value range the property exposed as a price set for the particular income groups. So this is more like a technical fix. We call it a technical fix. It's not the ideal because it doesn't follow the true market dynamics, and also it has probably already strict limitation to the housing choices. And in some situation, as we tested, it has run into the risk to run out of available housing units. So this is not something we actually like to see. A better way I'm thinking right now is just probably introduce this, maybe a property value kind of a quartile information as a part of the variables into the estimation process may help to improve the alignment. The second thought is just using the improved housing unit sampling. Of course, you can try different sizes. One thing we realized when developing the 2045 forecast, we have probably too large, too generous housing unit sampling, and we probably exposed too many housing units and to the in the process. And the original thought is just to improve the location choice model performance, but the result actually probably leading to another way. But anyway, figuring kind of tinkering with the housing unit sampling still not address the fundamental issue, because you still have the so-called choice orders by housing groups. The third possible solution is using something called implicit segmentation. This is something we tested in the 2050 forecast. Essentially, we dropped the segmentations, income segmentation, but instead we use the interaction variable. But here we just allow the interaction between the income segmentations, income quartile interact with the other independent variables. Of course, the negative side of doing that is that you could potentially have many more variables. So that making the estimation management of the estimation, the model quite more complicated. And also, if you want to simplify that one by dropping some of the interaction variables, then yes, you do have the concern of the underfittings. So that's something we actually observed in the 2050 forecast, but I think there's some definitely more complication of that. It's not just the segmentation. There's the 2020 data from the census, they have a differential privacy issue. They have this kind of a pandemic impact on the data quality. So it gives us a lot of headache, just beyond the HLCM model performance itself. Of course, thinking about segmentation, if some segmentation give you very significant, ordering effects, how about we just avoid using that particular segmentation? Something we tested and we are experimenting, and I think Tian will talk more about this one. Essentially, you don't use income quartile. How about other things like the household size, like the age groups, etc., etc. You can use some other thing which we don't lead to this really significant dependency issue. Of course, another solution is more kind of theoretically sounding is just that you randomize the choosers. You completely break the order of the simulation from the by the income group, and you can randomize the choosers. Of course, that's not the default setup from the urban thing. You have to do your own kind of updates and thinking about a different way to configure the model. But anyway, this is some method some of them we already tested, something we will be testing in the coming forecast. But anyway, segmentation is something we experienced, but not something we particularly focused. And we actually feel more important just to finding some way to improve the overall HLCM performance. And that at that point, we have some experience in working with the urban city team on more advanced model, essentially machine learning model. So now I'm going to pass the presentation to my colleague Tian, and Tian will talk about our exploration with the urban city machine learning model. Stop my presentation here.
All right. Let me share my go. You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm going to talk about our current improvement on the HLCM models. As Guan Yu thoroughly talked about the history of the models. After the last kind of forecast iterations, and in 2022, we start experiment with new network-based HLCM models, which replace previous use multinomial models to produce the HLCM result. So basically, we are utilize all building-related variables, the total number of variable close to 280, which include all the building variable attributes, and also interaction with households, jobs, environment, transportations, basically schools, everything we have related to the buildings and parcels and its related kind of attributes. And we are using this kind of a property for the neural network-based model. We have loss functions, which is we're using binary cross entropy, which is better for producing like a true and false kind of a loss kind of attribute for just estimate the result. And for sampling process, we are basically choosing 1-to-1 ratio in terms of positive and negative values when we are training the neural network-based models. And the default layer for neural network is we have two hidden layer. One is 30, one is 20. As you can see on your right side, is a graph. We have 280 variables, all buildings variables, and pass to the first hidden layer, which has 30 nodes, and then pass to the 20 nodes with the layer 2, and then pass to a single layer, which is probability score, which be defining whether or not this housing unit will be picked as a preferred location for this type of household. And talking about household segmentations, how to good household when we are developing model segments to preserve the household characteristic. For example, we have one person household with a larger family. We have age, and we have ownership, whether or not it's own or rent. And on the flip side, we need to preserve enough sample for the model to be trained on, which introduce issues of overfeedings when you have very small number of sampling. The model might overfeed to some kind of noise from the data, which is the things we want to avoid. Which leads to our experiment last year, I think. We start with the 24 segments, where we have breakdown by household size, 1, 2, 3 plus household size, and we have ownership, owner, renters, and we have 3 age of head brackets. So combine all of those, we have 24 segments for one individual large areas. And after running run the estimation simulations, and we are seeing pretty good result in the urban area, but we are seeing pretty bad result in rural communities. We are seeing drastic changes in household size, where a small household tend to move to rural area from denser area. We already see a lot of population drops in those areas, and that turns to the improvement we are being implemented, which reducing the 1, 2, 3, 4 plus household sizes to only with or without children. To do that, we want to try to still capture the characteristic of households, but on the flip end, reduce the segment size by half to 12 segments for single large areas. After estimation and simulation, the same process throughout as the O1 controls all the other variables. We are seeing rural household sizes decline, kind of mitigated and improve. And for example, Livingston previously is very drastic change in household sizes, and now has pretty stable household sizes and types after reducing the number of segments by using this segment instead. Okay, I will generally pass to Guangyu back and see what's I can talk about what's the next step. Maybe you can use my slides.
You can use these slides.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So first, can everybody hear me clearly? Because I just realized I may have a volume too low, the mic volume too low. So is it okay now or not?
Seems okay to me.
Okay, so great. So let's go. I mean, it's very simple. It's just that we will continue to look forward to different ways to improve the HLC and performance, and of course, at the same time to avoid some issue where you do notice like the order dependency. And as you know, Tian already explained, you know, we're working on the estimation using the machine learning model, and we have quite some achievement compared to our current, you know, the model test result. We have run through some kind of simulation using the machine learning result, and looking at compared to our the early urban sim model, it seemed to be there's quite some improvement in terms of the household distribution by different characteristic. So we'll continue to explore different confusion on that one. And of course, you know, the simulation test will definitely test the different way. And again, the fundamental goal is to use to improve the performance. And I believe this is from the machine learning side. Essentially, the segmented simulation will use 1 versus 5, essentially 1 out of every 5 housing stock vacant housing units as the try site for the households. And when we have the possibility, we'll definitely continue to test non-segmented simulation as well as a random chooser experiment. The reason we will still want to try this kind of a non-segmented simulation because handling hundreds of variables could be an issue in the traditional model, but it's much less problem for machine learning model. So that's some advantage we will have a more advanced modern system. So that's some kind of thoughts and kind of a vision on what we're going to do next. So now it's just the time for Q&A, and any question, just throw it to the chart or ask directly.
Hey, I'm going to hop in here, and sorry to say we've got to wrap it up. We're a couple minutes past the hour. But I really want to say thank you so much for everyone who joined us. Thank you to Carlos for pulling this webinar together. We could not do this without our interest group leaders, and I appreciate his work. Thank you to Scott, Guangyu, and Tian for presenting. And again, thank you for everyone who joined us. Hope to see you again very soon on another AMPO webinar. Hope you have a great day.